Welcome back to the Stop the Violence podcast. So I am starting a series here on the Stop the Violence podcast about the ethics of certain plant foods that vegans get a lot of shit for. You know, people will be like, but avocados though. And I'll say my disclaimer here in a moment. But, you know, I think as ethical vegans and as ethical people, we do want to be conscious about literally everything we purchase. I know that I can get borderline obsessive about this to the point where I won't buy a bra for several years. But I think it is good to be conscious about everything that we purchase and what it is we are voting for with our dollar. And I wish that everything was much more transparent than it is. So basically, when we do outreach with people on behalf of the animals for animal rights, a lot of times people, instead of, just looking at themselves and being like, oh shit, I feel guilty for paying for animals to have their throat slit, why don't I change? They'll try and put that guilt back onto you, and they'll be like, well, don't you know about avocados, or don't you know about quinoa, or whatever, in order to make you feel bad. And there's a few things wrong with this. The first thing is that an argument against X is not an argument against veganism. It is an argument against X. So an argument against avocados is not an argument against veganism. It is an argument against avocados. So that's the first problem. And the second problem is, just going with avocados again, the majority of people who buy avocados are indeed not vegan. So to blame specifically vegans, a currently small percentage of the population, for the ethics of avocados is really not genuine. The other problem is the person bringing up, hey, what about avocados or quinoa, is probably themselves consuming avocados or quinoa, and probably is not an anti-quinoa activist. They're just trying to bring something up to kind of be like, well, you're not perfect, so therefore I can slit animals' throats. But it doesn't really work, because, I want to go through some of these foods, and I have a little list here. And I'm going to do probably 3 at a time per episode. And I'm not going to do them all in a row because I feel like that would get boring. But we're going to do the first installment of the series today. So the ones I have on my list right now are cashews, almonds, avocados, quinoa, bananas, olive oil, palm oil, and coffee. But as far as I know, for all of these things, there's not living beings getting their throats slashed open to produce any of these items, at least as far as I know. So it's really not comparable to what the animals are going through. Like, something going on behind one of these foods is never going to be as horrible as what is happening to the animals. So this is not like a gotcha poking holes in veganism. This is just genuinely me being like, oh, well, what is wrong with said food? I'll look into it. Probably a lot more than the person who brought it up is going to look into it, which is probably almost not at all. But, I think people do genuinely care about these things, and we shouldn't just, at the same time as vegans, we shouldn't just be like, oh, well, that's just anti-vegan propaganda. I think we should look into the concerns being brought up, but without succumbing to outrageous headlines that are clearly anti-vegan, if that makes sense. So, here we go. Oh, and by the way, you don't need to consume any of these things on this list or any other problematic plant food in order to be vegan. There's tens of thousands of edible plant foods. So if there are even thousands of unethical plant foods, there's still even more thousands of ethical plant foods. And veganism is not under any false impressions that we can live without causing any harm. The definition understands that just by existing, unfortunately, we're going to have to cause harm and consume life. We just want to cause the least amount of harm possible by having a plant-based diet and living a vegan lifestyle, not buying leather, not buying fur, etc. Today we're calling into question cashews, almonds, and avocados, and we're going to do cashews first. And I'm slightly self-conscious here, I'm not gonna lie. It's not really my forte to research, the methods of plant agriculture and things like this. I don't feel like it's my expertise area. I consider my area of expertise to be like self-help, personal development, and animal rights and the philosophy of veganism. So I did my best with researching, but I think I want to definitely learn how to research better and somehow find access to more of a database than just Google Scholar, because I know when I was in college I had access to a big database through my library, and it kind of confuses me on like why all of us don't have access. Maybe you can pay for that. I don't know. But side tangent. So the concern with cashews is that they come from different countries, but predominantly India, and apparently this problem is in a bunch of these different countries. And when you go to the grocery store, such as Wegmans, and you buy a thing of cashews, it'll say cashews from India. I forgot the other countries. I'm terrible. But so the supplier's not even sure which country they're coming from. So if you buy cashews from the grocery store, you're probably supporting this issue, and you really have no way of confirming that you aren't supporting this issue. But we'll get to that in a moment. The issue is basically there are these impoverished women that they take the cashews off by hand, and the cashews have like these poisonous oils in them before they're processed, and they burn their hands, and their hands end up all black. And so I'm just going to play you the audio of a video that will explain it better than I just did. So here is the video.
Healthy, rich in vitamins, suitable for vegetarians, cashew nuts are in high demand. But at the other side of the world, this little nut has become a nightmare for thousands of women. India is the world's top cashew producer. In Tamil Nadu state, thousands of trees populate vast plantations. The nut itself is found on the bottom of this yellow fruit. It twists off easily, but the real work is only getting started. Dozens of processing facilities in the region supply mostly European and American customers. This factory owner's son oversees 150 employees, all of them women. To start, they use a machine to cut the nut in half. Their speed is impressive, and it has to be. They're paid by volume, just 4 to 6 euros per day.
They have to start early in the morning, so they'll work fast and they'll earn something. There is no stipulated fixed salary for them.
The rest of the work is even harder, and it's done entirely by hand. The shell and the skin of the nut are difficult to remove, and inside them are highly caustic acids that burn the skin. The women's hands are badly damaged. At a nearby cooperative, women also sort nuts by hand. They're self-employed and earn even less selling their products to wholesalers, 2 or 3 euros per day on average. Here, too, their hands are badly damaged by acids in the nuts.
These liquids we're constantly touching all day burn our fingers and turn them black.
They say gloves slow them down too much and quickly rip as well. Their problems aren't limited to the skin.
Our eyes burn. At night we feel feverish, so we can't sleep. Our eyesight is getting worse. We have no choice. It's their only work here. We depend on it completely.
By the time they arrive on Western shelves, the cashews no longer contain dangerous acids. As importers here in Europe continue to demand lower prices and greater quantities to meet skyrocketing demand, groups are calling on supermarkets to ensure fair trade practices and calling on shoppers to seek out fair trade nuts. Because at the other end of the supply chain, it's these women who bear the consequences.
So yeah, obviously that is the kind of life that most of us here listening to a podcast right now probably cannot even imagine. I mean, that sounds horrible. They're clearly being completely exploited, and you know, it sucks because it seems like they feel like they don't have any other choice. And unfortunately, just simply boycotting cashews is not necessarily going to help them have a better choice for work, and it's all the way in India, so it's like we're kind of limited on what we can do. Maybe we can raise more awareness about these women and fundraise for them to improve their conditions. I'm not really sure. Maybe there's people already trying to do this work. That would be valuable work to do. But, you know, in the meantime, I can't just buy cashews from the grocery store in good conscience, knowing that if I'm driving up the supply, these women are going to have more and more work to do and expect it to work faster and faster. Like, that just doesn't sit right with me at all. So I found that video on theveganreview.com. It's an article about this, and it also says in the article that on top of that, according to the Trade for Development Center, only 3% of cashews sold on the world markets are fair trade certified. So it means that there is a very high chance that your favorite cashews from the snack aisle are not produced ethically. And the thing too is, like, if you watch Seaspiracy, you know that these certifications and labels can be completely full of shit. So I have a really hard time trusting even something like fair trade. I haven't researched into it, but I plan on it, especially when we get into like coffee in another episode and stuff. Definitely watch this video if you can, or at least Google image blood cashew or cashew women's hands, and you'll see. You have to look at these pictures. If you're like, I don't know if I want to give up buying cashews, like, go look at the pictures. It's like us activists tell people all the time, if you want that burger, go look at the slaughter footage. However, do you have to give up all cashews completely? My stance as of right now, given the knowledge that I know as of right now, is no, because I did find at least one company that seems to be producing cashews in a way that doesn't involve turning these poor women's hands black and totally invading their rights. And there is a website called nestandglow.com where people toured this factory. Apparently there is a factory in Bali, and I think it's called the East Bali Cashew Factory, and I think it's the East Bali Cashew Company. And there's videos on this nestandglow.com website where they show the inside of the factory, and I'm just going to read the process that they do. So the cashew nut is harvested from the ripe cashew apple. Cashew apples are an edible sweet fruit, but they are too delicate to be transported and sold. Whole cashews are sun-dried. Cashews are sorted by a machine into size. This is needed for the shelling machines. The cashews are steamed to help with shelling. The steamer is fueled using a custom-made biomass boiler burning the cashew shells. There's a toxic resin inside the shell layer, and steaming helps destroy the toxin. Machines split 2 cashews per second. Any the machine misses are manually split. They all used to be manually split before, the factory. And what they show in the video is the workers all have ample gloves on, and they're not trying to go a million miles an hour, and there's just a few of them in a bowl rather than piles and piles, assuming that, they didn't just film this on their best day and every other day it's just as bad, and assuming that the factory footage is not like fake or something. So then the freshly shelled wet cashews are dried at 100 degrees Celsius for an hour. A thin layer of skin covers the shelled nut. It's manually peeled and sorted. And the article says that the company being in this area, it's a poor area, has been really positive for the area and has brought money to different things such as education and healthcare and whatnot. So assuming that that's true and that that's not just lip service, then this would be a good company that I would feel good about purchasing cashews from. Check out the video. You can see, it looks a whole lot different from the conditions of the other video where the women are sitting on the floor and they have these black hands. totally different. I mean, there's always going to be, with factory work, there's always going to be labor rights concerns and repetitive motions and stuff. And I want to eventually get to a point in my life where I'm super minimalistic and living off grid and just not supporting any kind of factory as much as possible. But, the definition of veganism is to do our best as much as possible and practicable. No, we don't need cashews. I just stopped buying them altogether after I learned about this and looked at the images. But I think I might be giving this company a try. And if anyone knows, like, hey, this is all a lie, like this company is actually trash and can expose that for me, then I would be really grateful. I mean, I can live without cashews. But yeah, I hope that we can provide some relief to those women because they need the work. It's kind of a complicated issue. And I wish that, all humans in this world had basic human rights. But moving onward, avocados. So the main thing that I found when researching about avocados was that you don't want to buy the ones from Mexico, basically, long story short. Because apparently in Mexico, the avocados are super intertwined with the cartel and there's violence going on. And since avocados are super valuable down there, they're stolen a lot. And yeah, I'm just going to try and play a couple of video clips to help you understand.
In Michoacan, where 80% of Mexico's avocados originate, cartels run a so-called blood avocado trade, violently enforcing a non-negotiable extortion fee from farmers based on the size of their land and the weight of their crop. Some restaurants have begun an avocado boycott, as we all weigh up the ethics behind our eating habits. Experts suggest that water shortages could affect 5 billion people by 2050, and rainfall in the so-called drought belt, which includes Mexico and South America, is predicted to decline. But whilst evidence of environmental degradation is mounting, the avocado industry is still growing, along with consumer demand.
So yeah, this video also talked about the amount of water that an avocado takes, but I already did a whole episode about water footprint, so I'm not going to get into that. But here's a hint. If you want to save the most water, the biggest thing you can do is go vegan. Please pardon the fucking lawnmower noises if you can hear them. It's just nonstop lawn mowing around here. But here's another video clip.
The most commonly stolen crop? Avocados, which is worth about $1 a piece. So far this year, about 69,000 pounds of avocados have been stolen.
Avocados are only grown in a few rural areas. They're difficult to protect, and they're valuable for their size. All things that make them prime targets for theft.
Avocado theft is at least $1 million a year problem in San Diego County.
For years, Grand Theft Avocado has devastated farmers in California, the state that supplies about 90% of the country's avocados.
Imagine if all your paychecks for the whole year were hanging on this tree and somebody came and took them just before you were going to cash them all.
In the past, the California Avocado Commission has worked to prevent thefts, but they've also hurt farmers. In 2009, the commission was audited for questionable spending. The report found that employees had used up to $2 million of the commission's money on tickets to sporting events, massages, expensive hotel rooms, and luxury spas, where I'm assuming they got face masks made from stolen avocados. Things are even worse in Mexico, the largest producer of avocados. The billion-dollar industry in Michoacan is so profitable, drug cartels are resorting to violence to get their hands on the green gold.
They extorted large sums from local packers and shippers. They've also kidnapped and murdered local residents who stood in their way.
Murdered.
The industry is afraid that avocados may become the agricultural equivalent of Africa's banned blood diamonds.
Despite all of this, avocados grown in Mexico are still advertised like they're the happiest product in the world.
Avocados from Mexico.
People get murdered. Everywhere you turn, there's a new avocado scandal. During the California drought, Tom Selleck allegedly stole water from a fire hydrant to replenish his own ranch and avocado farm.
The suit says over 18 months, water was repeatedly siphoned from the hydrant. Today, Selleck is being sued for $21,000.
The kicker is, Tom Selleck doesn't even like avocados.
You made me eat one on the show, and I don't like avocado.
Even the etymology of avocado is scandalous. Take it, Dr. Oz.
They grow like this, one lower than the other, and there are always two of them in pairs.
Okay, they're getting into non-important stuff now. Basically, they're about to say that they look like testicles, and that's kind of how they got their original name, aguacate, or whatever the fuck. But not important. So basically, it seems to me like avocados from Mexico are definitely out. Like, not gonna buy avocados from Mexico, that's for sure. I don't want to be supporting murder and cartels and all that shit. I hope to see more information about this and to learn more about this and see, like, is it an issue of the whole entire industry? Is there any way to support certain companies that aren't involved in drug violence? I'm not really sure at this moment. And in California, it seems like the droughts are a problem, basically. But again, like, listen to my water footprint episode. You can do so much more to reduce your water footprint if you're vegan and through other ways that I think if you were buying avocados from California and, again, it's not about being perfect. We're talking about using water versus paying for violence. You know what I mean? I'd rather you just use some water and conserve it through other ways in your life, or only buy avocados from California occasionally. I haven't looked into avocados from Florida, but I haven't seen anything through my research that stuck out to me about avocados in Florida being bad or involved with drugs or being involved in an extreme drought. But if you know anything about avocados from Florida, let me know. The thing is, you have to be careful. I had already assumed that most likely any avocado I find at the grocery store is probably gonna not be ethical. It's probably gonna be from Mexico or something else wrong with it just because of the nature of mass production. But I was browsing through the avocados and I saw this sign. It was like Florida avocados, and I got so excited. I'm like, wow, there's nothing wrong, I don't think, with Florida avocados. Maybe I can actually buy an avocado for once. But then I looked at the sticker on the actual avocado and it still said Mexico. So I was like, what the fuck? So you gotta watch out. People will try to fool you with their signs and labels. That's really frustrating to me, but don't just be easily fooled and be like, oh, the sign says Florida, but without looking at the actual label on there. My best bet, I think, would be to either just not do avocados or to only make sure that you get them from either California or Florida. And yeah, I don't know, that's kind of where I'm at right now. I currently just don't buy any avocados, but if I feel like, oh my god, I need to, then I'm gonna research an ethical place within the United States to get them. So that's what I know right now. Let me know if you know more. But I mean, it sucks, Obviously, the avocados themselves are not causing drug cartels. They're just kind of, it seems like, intertwined with them. And, it sucks because you can produce a cashew ethically. You can produce an avocado ethically. But you can never slit an animal's throat ethically because it will never be necessary. I just want to take it back to that, This is not like... Anti-avocado arguments are not anti-veganism arguments. They're just not. And we can, even with a cell phone, there may possibly be a way, maybe, I don't know, to make a cell phone ethically. In the meantime, I'm only going to buy them used, but there might be a way. But there's never going to be a way to slit an animal's throat, to take away an animal's baby from them, and to grind up an animal alive. That's just not a thing. But anyway, we're gonna move on to almonds because almonds are something that vegans get a lot of shit for, mainly because of how much water they use, but also mainly because of the bees that are shipped in to, because it's required that they ship in bees to pollinate them. And so sometimes people will say, oh, you don't eat honey for the bees, but you eat almonds? Well, you're a hypocrite. And I didn't really realize why they were saying that, but now it kind of makes sense. So let's get into it. So before we do, though, I do want to kind of discuss how there is kind of an anti-almond milk thing going on to make vegans feel like, you think you're more ethical for buying almond milk? Well, look at this. And so we have a lot of articles out there with really inflated headlines like The Guardian. We love The Guardian, don't we? That says, like sending bees to war, the deadly truth behind your almond milk obsession. So this article actually isn't that bad. It kind of coincides with the other research I'm doing, but I think it is interesting. It is a beekeeper basically complaining, like, I sell honey, but honey is not as profitable as sending my bees to pollinate the almonds. And when my bees go and pollinate the almonds, they get susceptible to pesticides like Roundup, which is known to cause cancer in humans, and they are susceptible to getting mites, and 30% of them end up dying. But I think it's interesting. He says the bees in the almond groves are being exploited and disrespected, who is an organic beekeeper. But the thing is, if he's selling honey, he is also disrespecting and exploiting the bees. So it's kind of hypocritical. I just want to really quick play a clip from Earthling Ed's video on why vegans don't eat honey, because I think it is important. I think, when it comes to pollinating plant foods, and we'll get into this later, but a lot of our plant foods, like our fruits and whatnot, literally need the pollination of bees. There's not a way around it. And there's better ways that we can use different bees and not just honeybees, and we'll get to that. But honey, on the other hand, is not necessary. We have absolutely no dietary need for honey. So paying for honey is not paying for something that's necessary, so therefore it is cruel. Unfortunately, using the bees to pollinate foods is a, necessity. But I'm kind of repeating myself. Let's get to Earthling Ed's clip here.
And you can buy them with their wings clipped and have them posted to your house. Furthermore, when the hives have been harvested for the honey, they are often culled for the winter, as it is cheaper to kill off the entire hive than it is to make sure they have food during the winter months. Bee farmers will often cull hives who aren't displaying the right temperament as well. There are a number of ways that beekeepers will cull bee colonies, which include sealing off the hive and then pouring petrol into it, or drowning them with soapy water, or gassing them to death with carbon dioxide. Alternatively, some beekeepers will trap the bees in large industrial bin bags, which are then left in the sun to ensure the bees either suffocate to death or die due to the increasingly high temperatures in the bag. Sometimes beekeepers won't cull the entire hive, but will instead depopulate a certain number of bees or kill the queen.
I'm gonna kill her right now.
And even when hives are not culled, it is not uncommon for bee farmers to lose a significant percentage of their hives due to factors such as poor insulation, not enough food, or parasites. Honey is a bee's food. It is produced when they swallow nectar, regurgitate it, and then repeat this process many times. It takes about 12 worker bees an entire lifetime to create a single teaspoon of honey. However, because we take the honey, if the bees are not culled, they will be given a sugar syrup, which is devoid of many of the essential aspects of the honey that the bees require to be healthy. Couple this with the fact that honeybees are selectively bred, meaning that the population gene pool is narrowed, and they are consequently at a significantly higher risk of diseases and large-scale die-offs. Furthermore, honeybee hives are regularly traded locally and internationally, often shipped in packaging boxes, which allows the rapid spread of diseases and parasites, such as deformed wing virus and varroa mite.
This eventually destroys a hive because it weakens the immune system of the bees, and it makes them more vulnerable to stress and disease.
These pathogens can affect wild bumblebee populations and spread between wild bee species when the honeybees visit the same flower. But don't we need to eat honey because bee populations are in decline? It's no secret that bee populations are in decline across the world. But in the past 50 years, the honeybee population has increased by 45%. So is the honey industry actually helping? The UK, as an example, is home to around 200.
So yeah, not fucking good. And the fact that we need to use bees to pollinate our crops is not an excuse to pay for honey or to say that buying almonds is the same thing as buying honey. It's similar logic to, yes, the avocados from Mexico are unethical and you can't really justify paying for them, but the avocado itself is not unethical. You can produce an avocado ethically. The fact that almond trees typically need bees to pollinate them itself is not unethical. It's the way that they're going about it. It's with the pesticides, and it's with them using honeybees and shipping honeybees instead of a more natural or better or way where the bees are not coming from the same beekeepers that are honey beekeepers, if that makes sense. In this article by The Guardian, they did talk about this Be Better certification program launched in 2017 by the not-for-profit Exorcist Society, saying that they introduced biodiversity into almond groves to naturally control pests and nourish honeybees. Exorcist is working with almond growers to plant California wildflowers, mustard, and clover in between the rows of trees and native flowering hedges along the perimeter of the orchard, a kind and eco-friendly fence to help keep bees in the orchard. I don't know if that's a good idea or not because I didn't look into it further, but it seems like there is a better way, and again, the almond itself is not what's unethical here. It's the treatment of the bees, and of course the water, but again, listen to my episode on water footprint. So I found this article on motherjones.com called "Are Your Delicious Healthy Almonds Killing Bees?" And this stat seems to be consistent over the research I've done, but 80% of the almonds consumed on planet Earth are from California, which is kind of weird to think about. For the whole world? Wow. And then it also explains why bees have to be shipped in. So when you grow almond trees in vast monocrops, pollination from wild insects doesn't do the trick. Each spring, it takes 1.6 million honeybee hives to pollinate the crop, about 1 million of which must be trucked in from out of state. Altogether, the crop requires the presence of a jaw-dropping 60% of the managed honeybees in the entire country, the U.S. Department of Agriculture reports. Wow. They're probably doing that too, let's just be honest here. In general, though, monocropping is proven to not be good for the environment and for anything. We really should be doing community gardens, and just the whole system of agriculture, including plant agriculture, needs to be reformed from the ground up, in my opinion. Clearly, monocropping is, no matter what the crop is not a good idea. So this article talks about the dying off of the bees, just like the other article, and it says, the Pollinator Stewardship Council blames the cocktail of pesticides, insecticides, and fungicides almond growers use to keep their crops humming, and Musson thinks the group may have a point. And then there is a problem with fungicides and pesticides being used in almond farming that claim to be bee safe but really aren't, so that's cool. Or that different pesticides that are safe for the bees are being combined by the almond farmers, and then the combination becomes toxic for the bees. So it's beginning to look like it's not really almonds themselves that are hurting the bees, it's the pesticides and fungicides, as well as, of course, the damage and deaths that happen when transporting bees to pollinate them. But again, we kind of don't really have a choice. A lot of our crops need to be pollinated, and a lot of these crops we do need for our diet, such as berries. You know, they fight cancer, they have antioxidants, and things like that. But, you know, veganic farming and organic farming and smaller community gardens and vertical farming and indoor growing of crops in smaller amounts rather than monocrops, and solutions like this toward the future would take care of a lot of this, at least from my understanding. It seems like we should be pouring some of our tax dollars into researching how to reform all of our agriculture, and I don't know why the fuck they're spending it on the military and shit like that instead. Boggles my mind every time. So, almonds are not looking too good right now, but is it ethical to make sure that you purchase totally organic almonds? Maybe? Let's read a bit more information. So, non-organic almonds can be pasteurized with propylene oxide. Because of some trouble with salmonella, all almonds are required to be pasteurized. The use of propylene oxide is banned in organic products, but is often used to pasteurize conventional almonds. Other common uses of PPO include... Hold on, I'm getting a phone call. Please hold. Pardon that, the soy boyfriend called me. I read my notes for the podcast and articles and stuff right off my phone, so... Anyways, where was I? Other common uses of PPO include building insulation, foams in furniture, and aircraft de-icers. So that's pretty disgusting. The EPA has classified it as a probable human carcinogen, and the American Cancer Society puts it on their list of chemicals reasonably anticipated to be human carcinogens. The National Institutes of Health says PPO may cause genetic defects and may cause cancer. You know what else is a carcinogen? Meat and animal products, eggs. Keep that in mind as well. So non-organic almond crops are treated with glyphosate and pesticides. Glyphosate is the infamous main ingredient in Monsanto's Roundup herbicide. The EPA says 89% of almond crops are treated with glyphosate. That's not good. It's known in the state of California to cause cancer under Proposition 65, and civil cases are still playing out in court with people who developed non-Hodgkin lymphoma suing the company. We also need to think of the bees. The majority of U.S. almonds are grown in California, and more than half of America's honeybees are used to pollinate those almond crops. Usage of pesticides threaten the honeybees because some are lethal or toxic to the bees. Unfortunately, many factors besides chemicals harm or hurt bees, but growing crops organically is a good place to start with protecting them. And I know this sounds really sketchy, but what I was just reading from was a brand called Bumble Bar that makes products using organic almonds, so obviously there's probably going to be a bias to where they're going to think that, yes, all you have to do is buy organic almonds, but I still thought that was helpful information, and it seemed true as far as I can tell. I remember my grandma would use Roundup in her garden, and if only I had known how toxic it was, that's not good. Side note, she passed away from leukemia. I'm sure that was, from other things, but, whatever. The more I learn, I just want to live off grid and, do the community garden thing and plant a bunch of wildflowers to help the bees and get away from all these chemicals and toxins and, just really reduce my impact on the earth and get away from all this nonsense. That's just more and more and more the conclusion I'm coming to. Oh, and side tangent also, when I was on the phone with the soy boyfriend, we were talking about how seasonal eating is a really good thing for vegans to do and for anyone to do, but, everyone should be vegan. But anyway, we need to be eating seasonal so that we don't have all of these monocrops in a place like California, because the only reason they're in California is because they don't really have a winter. But we could be growing crops on so many other areas of the world if we could just get our shit together and get the technology together to do vertical farming and whatnot and all these things I'm mentioning. And it would be much easier to achieve those goals if we also all ate seasonally. A lot of the issues driving these issues are that instead of trying to regulate anything and do what's right, they just do whatever they have to do to meet consumer demand, which, aka do whatever they do to profit and make money. And it really sucks that our capitalistic world is ran that way, because really we should have these regulations that say, okay, we are only going to grow seasonal and you guys all need to freeze stuff to eat during the winter and stuff like that. Then we wouldn't be relying on California so much. So learning about pollination has been stressing me out, so I tried to research specifically pollination a little bit more. So I want to read this little pollination facts thing from the American Beekeeping Federation. So it's titled, Honeybees Are Pollinators. Honeybees contribute nearly $20 billion to the value of U.S. crop production. This contribution, made by managed honeybees, comes in the form of increased yields and superior quality crops for growers and American consumers. A healthy beekeeping industry is invaluable to a healthy U.S. agriculture economy. See, here's the thing. They're prioritizing the economy and money over what's really the best thing to do. But anyways, many of the country's crops would not exist without the honeybee at bloom time. Crop yield and quality would be greatly reduced without honeybee pollination. As honeybees gather pollen and nectar for their survival, they pollinate crops such as apples, cranberries, melons, and broccoli. Some crops, including blueberries and cherries, are 90% dependent on honeybee population. One crop, almonds, depends entirely on the honeybee for pollination at bloom time. Each year, American farmers and growers continue to feed more people using less land. They produce an abundance of food that is nutritious and safe. That's very arguable, especially when you get into animal agriculture. But anyways, honeybees are very much a part of this modern agricultural success story. Not really sure if it's much of a success story, but it's estimated that there are about 2.7 million bees in the U.S. today, 2/3 of which travel the country each year pollinating crops and producing honey and beeswax. The California almond industry requires approximately 1.8 million colonies of honeybees in order to adequately pollinate nearly 1 million acres of bearing almond orchards. So the fact that the bees, literally from the honey industry, are the same bees used to pollinate almonds is really unsettling for vegans who do not consume honey for ethical reasons. But does it have to be honeybees? And are honeybees like the only option? So this next bit of information is actually from Wikipedia. I know Wikipedia is a controversial resource to use, but if anything is wrong with this and you know that, then please let me know. But according to Wikipedia, honeybees are actually inefficient pollinators, so demand for other pollinators has risen. The blue orchard bee is more efficient. The inefficiency of honeybees is compensated for by using a large number of hives, which leads to a surplus of honey as well as beekeepers killing off bees. And I wrote in here, see Earthling Ads video, we already visited that. In many cases, various native bees are vastly more efficient at pollinating. I found that really interesting. In a very few cases, it has been possible to develop commercially viable pollination techniques that use the more efficient pollinators rather than continued reliance on honeybees, as in the management of alfalfa leafcutter bee. So that got me really curious. That got me thinking, like, okay, is the reason we're using honeybees because of the honey industry? And why are we using the bees that are not the most optimal bees to even use? Like that, requires so many more hives because of their inefficiency. Like, why aren't we using the type of bees that would require the least amount of hives and, cause the least amount of harms to bees? Like, that really puzzles me. And I tried to do some more research about, this topic. So not only are honeybees not the most effective at pollinating, they also are more sensitive to pesticides than other types of bees. And again, we really shouldn't be using any pesticides. We have the technology and knowledge now to do all of this organically, and I don't know why that's not the norm, but I found that interesting. So I found a meta-analysis comparing the sensitivity of bees to pesticides, which is an article in Ecotoxicology from January 2014. And I did find some interesting information about the whole topic in this study. So it reads, honeybees remain the most economically valuable pollinator of crop monoculture worldwide, and their absence can cause a 90% decrease in the yield of some fruit, seed, and nut crops. Although honeybees are versatile, cheap, convenient, and easy to manage compared to several wild bees, for some crops they are not the most effective pollinators on a per flower basis. So, that's pretty messed up. The only reason we're using honeybees specifically is because they're easier to keep and to fuck with and to modify and to do the horrible things we do to them. So that's really pretty messed up, and because, it's cheaper and more convenient. Wild bees are reported to be the main pollinators for many crops, and often their pollination service can't be replaced by honeybees. Visitation by wild and domesticated bees promoted fruit set independently, thus honeybees foraging on flower supplements rather than substitutes pollination by wild bees. For this reason, relying only on single pollinator species can constitute a risk, as it exposed crop pollination to various decline factors such as parasites and diseases which are species specific. Apart from the domesticated bee, there are at least 16,000 other described bee species globally, but only few of them are managed commercially as crop pollinators. So that to me is crazy. I had no idea that there was 16,000 different bee species that we could be using, and we're instead commodifying just a giant number of the same bee. Like, monocropping, packing thousands of animals in a shed, using a whole conglomeration of the same species of bee. None of this is natural, and that's why we're having so many problems. It makes sense. So the study listed the factors for decreasing wild bees as climate change, pathogens, parasites, habitat fragmentation and loss, pollutants, and that these things all act singularly or simultaneously. And the extensive use of chemical pesticides have also contributed. So then I was wondering, okay, well, do, these commercial almond growing operations have to be pollinated by bees? And then I realized that self-pollinating almond trees are actually a thing. According to growingproduce.com, the new self-fertile varieties have been proven to be highly productive and very efficient to farm, this earning a percentage of most almond growers' acreage. The top self-fertile almond varieties are currently Independence and Shasta. Independence was developed by Zyger Genetics of Modesto, California, and was the first commercially successful self-fertile variety. It is available from Dave Wilson Nursery. And so here's me just not being an expert on plant agriculture or GMO or anything, but I'm going like, okay, but does that mean it's GMO, and isn't GMO bad? Or is, crossbreeding plants not GMO? That's kind of where I need to research, but I thought that would be an interesting thing to add in, just the concept of what if we could use self-pollinating almond trees for these more massive productions. That would be an interesting thing to look into, I feel like. So that led to this information. So according to ScienceDaily.com, ARS geneticist Craig Ledbetter is developing a new line of self-pollinating almond trees. Self-pollinating almonds are not new. The Tuano variety, originally from Spain, has been around for centuries. So I'm sitting here thinking like, okay, that's good. That's not GMO. Why aren't we using that in our massive almond groves? Like, what the fuck? But apparently its traits are not attractive when compared to the California's most popular almond, nonpareil. The seed coat has a hairy texture and it has a very thick shell, so only 32% of it is edible compared to 60 to 65% with the California almond. But the thick shell makes it more resistant to pests. So these people are saying an almond that has traits from both varieties would be ideal. But I'm saying, like, get over the fact that it produces less. You're going to plant this, and it's not going to require bees, and it's also not going to have the requirement of pesticides, and that's a win-win situation. So why don't we put ethics above profit for once in our fucking lives and just use that almond tree instead? I'm fired up. But anyways, Ledbetter and his collaborators used tuono as the male pollen parent in conventional hybridizations with California adopted almond cultivars and selections. The scientist made crosses. He made self-pollinating seedlings, and by 2008 they had very good almond harvests with these new, trees. I should be more confident in myself. I shouldn't doubt myself as much. I was in college for a science-related major, and I did take, a bio lab, and I did learn about what GMO was. I should have, remembered and realized that. But GMO is basically, I've done a project like this where you take a pipette thingy and you take out certain genes and put in other genes, and it doesn't sound like this is what this guy was doing. It sounds like this guy was just breeding, and breeding and GMO is not really the same thing, at least from my understanding from looking it up just now and refreshing my memory. So it seems like, why don't we get this dude's almond tree creation to be what is massively produced? Why aren't we doing that? But yeah, that concludes my segment on almonds and the bees, and I think that we're doing the bees wrong, and we should be changing our whole plant agriculture system, and we shouldn't be using honeybees for this because it's resulting in more honeybee deaths because it's not as efficient, and it's kind of overwhelming to think about the whole pollination side of things. I want to be able to say almonds are a-okay to buy as long as they're organic, but that doesn't, for me, take care of the fact that they're pollinated by the honeybees, and while those bees are not being susceptible to pesticides and stuff when they're organic, they're still being shipped in trucks to California, and that just doesn't sit well with me, especially with how many are required. So I'm kind of not feeling almonds right now. I'm probably not going to buy them anymore until I find a company that is not a massively produced, like maybe a smaller organic almond company, which I'm sure exists. I'm sure it exists somewhere. So, again, it's kind of like the almond itself is not what's unethical. It's the system and all the intricacies involved with it. So to summarize, cashews, absolutely, I am not buying them from the grocery store or getting anything from restaurants involving cashews because they're probably supporting the unethical things that I talked about in this podcast. And I'm going to look into ordering cashews from the East Bali Cashew Company because that seems to be ethical and produced in a factory, and to get rid of the issues I discussed. Now, when it comes to avocados, I'm absolutely never going to buy avocados from Mexico. I'm going to check the labels carefully. I'm probably just personally, because I don't feel like I'm dying without them, not generally, I'm going to probably avoid them. But if I want an avocado really bad, I'm going to go online and order it from Florida if possible and make sure that it's legit from Florida. That's probably what I'm going to do because of the drought issues and everything in California. And then with almonds, like I said, right now I'm probably just kind of going to stay away from almonds and almond milk. Almond milk is not very good, and the soy boyfriend actually told me that they only use like 15 almonds for a thing of almond milk. I'm not fact-checking him on that, I'm just gonna take his word for it, but that's pretty weird. No wonder it tastes so watery, but I can definitely live without almonds. But, similar to with the cashews and the avocados, if I find a company that makes almonds to where they're not hurting the bees, and they're obviously organic and they're produced more in a small scale. I'm sure that exists out there, there's solutions to things, and I will do my research into that company and just only support that company. So those are my conclusions right now, but once again, it's more important that you're vegan and not paying for animals to have their throats slashed open and their babies taken away and all of that than it is to avoid certain plant products because of the ethics behind them, for the most part, unless, there's human rights violations, then it's like, okay, we should really care about these things, if that makes sense. It's not a perfect world. The system is flawed, and we need to change it from the ground up. We need to eat seasonally. We need to have community gardens, veganic, vertical farming, all that good shit. There is shit that we can do, because we have to eat something, but someone shouldn't ever die and immensely suffer for that something. To the absolute best of our ability. I wanted to do a little bit of an outro topic now. So that concludes, cashews, almonds, and avocados. But I wanted to quickly mention that Oatly's stock is now public, I think as of today. So I don't know much about that shit, but I feel like we should all be buying their stock because they are doing really well. And there's definitely not any ethical issues behind oats that I'm aware of, at least. I just wanted to kind of vent about certain YouTubers that I have really adored and watched for years and looked up to. And one of them is actually the person who inspired me to start eating plant-based in the first place. And how they're all pissing me off lately. So that one is Kailyn Nicholson. I adore her. My content is clearly inspired by her. And I've been watching her since 2015 or 2016, which is insane. I originally went plant-based because of her. I say plant-based because she never talks about animal rights. But I just knew that she'd always been vegan and showing her vegan food on, her vlogs and stuff. But recently in her channel Co's, she made this Co's Kitchen video where she was talking about the ethics of organic and GMO and all that. But then at the end she said, well, if you eat meat and dairy, buy it local. And she even had footage of hens showing when she said that. And I just facepalmed so hard. I'm like, I thought you were vegan. How could you ever promote local meat and dairy? Local doesn't mean anything to the cow having her throat slit. That made me so upset. And then I heard her on a podcast recently saying that she was gonna get a hen house. And she watched that Kiss the Ground documentary with that Alan Savory bullshit that's been debunked, by the way, by Earthling Ed, where it's you don't have to take the poop out of the loop and you can still eat animals and it's not bad for the planet. And it makes me think maybe she was vegan for the planet and maybe now she feels like she doesn't have to be. She still is, as far as I know, but for her to promote local meat and dairy is really fucked up. And then for her to say on her podcast that she's thinking about getting a hen house, it's okay, wherever you purchase those hens, you're supporting the egg industry, the grinding up a life of male chicks and the slaughter of hens. And if you're going to start, why else would she get a hen house if it's not to start exploiting them for their eggs? Watch Earthling Ed's video on Our Backyard Eggs Ethical. So that's really pissing me off, and I'm really worried about her. But I try to comment, but they're big YouTubers. And then there's Isabel Page. And Isabel Page is the coolest vlogger ever. Her lifestyle is what I aspire my lifestyle to eventually be really off-grid, living in the mountains. And she's so happy and minimalistic and just, she's awesome. But then all of a sudden, after eating totally whole foods plant-based for a year straight that I've been watching her, and she's been vegan for years, and even made videos about the benefits of eating plant-based. And she even mentioned in one of her vlogs, oh, it's horrible how people treat the planet and the animals. And I was like, wow, this is a real one. Like, she's even mentioning the animals, like, damn. And then, but all of a sudden, she's using wool and making blankets and shit out of wool. And I'm like, oh my god, why? Watch Earthling Ed's video about wool is cruel. And, you know, the fashion industry. And Cave Light Films also made a new video about that too. But I'm just like, oh my god, I thought you were vegan. I thought you cared about animals. And she said like, oh, I got it from a local farm. And it's just, oh, that word local again. It means nothing. It means nothing. Like, sheep are having their throats slashed open for your wool. And the sheep don't care if they're local to you or not. And now she's also using honey. Like, she never used honey this whole year I was watching her, and all of a sudden she's using honey. And in her recent vlog, she just ordered bees to start beekeeping them. For honey and shit. Oh my god, like, so frustrating. And then me and my mom talked about Aaron Doughty on the last episode, so I won't get too much into it. But I thought this whole time, all these years, that Aaron Doughty was vegan. He always said nothing else but that he was vegan. And now I'm coming to find out that he totally trashed the vegan diet. He even tried to say plants feel pain. He tried to say, like, oh, well, you know, maybe that plant has a consciousness and they're saying, oh, I wish you'd eat the animal instead. Like, he literally said that shit. I can't even, like, my ears started bleeding when I heard that. And that was really disappointing. And now he's saying, like, oh, I eat, you know, a lot of fish and whatever, and I dabble in, you know, meat, but none of my meat was abused. It's organic and free range and whatever the fuck. And it's just like, come on. How can someone who is a spiritual leader, who's, you know, so woke and so high vibe, like, what is high vibe about murdering animals? I don't get it. So I'm so now I'm like, shit, I love watching vloggers, and it gives me inspiration because I'm a vlogger. But I recently found the YouTube channel Hitomi Machizuki. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, but she seems to be vegan, and I don't know if she knows about animal rights and stuff, but I watched a vlog from her for the first time today, and it was very enjoyable. So yeah, I mean, there's still hope out there. And there's also my vlog channel. You know, I'm not gonna pull some fucking non-vegan shit on my vlogs, but I just wanted to rant about that and see if anyone else is noticing some of these influencers and content creators gradually being not vegan anymore. And it's so frustrating because these kinds of people are promoting veganism as a diet, and it's not a diet. It's not a diet. It's so frustrating. I could punch a pillow right now. But yeah, anyway, I'm gonna wrap this one up. Hopefully this episode wasn't too terrible. I'm out of my comfort zone here, but I genuinely care about the ethics of literally everything I purchase, and that includes plant foods. And as ethical vegans especially, we should be conscious of certain plant foods that might be hurting animals in, like, kind of indirect ways, such as palm oil hurting the orangutans. And there's just so much out there to learn about, and it's building a really good case for we all need to just be growing our own food as much as possible and eating seasonally. But yep, don't want to repeat myself again too much. I think I'm gonna close this out. So if you're not already vegan, listen to the TEDx talk Every Argument Against Veganism by Earthling Ed. Watch the Dominion Movement documentary, free on YouTube or at watchdominion.com. Follow the Stop the Violence podcast wherever you are listening. It's available on Apple, Anchor, and Spotify, as well as my YouTube channel, Alicia Demi. That's ALISIA space DEMI. I make vlogs, lifestyle content, personal growth, meditation, spirituality, dealing with ADHD, music and art. I do a lot of videos of my drawings and kind of how I draw and stuff like that, and how to be happy, and yeah, a lot of good shit. as well as animal rights activism. I always film the things that I do, whether it's vigils, outreach, protests, making art, etc., etc. I put out one new podcast episode and one new vlog YouTube video every Friday, as well as other content in between and here and there. So, I hope you have a beautiful day. Bye!